Okay, I am going to attempt to switch the guts from this iNext Super Nintendo USB controller into this defective Hyperkin. As far as I know, the placement of the screws is more or less the same, and possibly the boards will line up. The problem with these Hyperkins is they're not plug-and-play with Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance emulators, even though they should be. Surprisingly, this is plug-and-play. And then the game controller I've been previously using, this one, which for some reason I cannot find another one like it at all on eBay. It's got no brand name at all. It's somewhat similar to the iNext, but it's heavier and feels of better quality, and surprisingly has very snappy reactive shoulder buttons, which even the ones on the iNext feel a little spongier, and the ones on the Hyperkin are really spongy. Now, my biggest concern is the gauge of wire, because the gauge of wire used on the Hyperkin is like a third thicker. They lowered the gauge with the newer model Hyperkins, but this older one, it was just so well built on the outside. It had a great cable, it had a great structural design. The one thing it didn't have was a decent board. Because, I mean, this crap works with Raspberry Pi and emulators and other stuff like that just fine. So, why can't Hyperkin just use a board that doesn't need all this crap? I shouldn't have to map all the buttons, but on top of that, I've bought two of these older Hyperkins because I really wanted ones like this, and both of the ones that I got were defective. I will not say that Hyperkin's newer product, the controller I made a video about before, was defective, because that one was not. It worked just fine after remapping the buttons on an emulator. But for some reason, these older ones, they just don't work anymore, I think. So, I'm going to have to open this one up and swap the board. And since I have no way for something or someone to hold the phone while I do this, I'm going to have to just do little video updates on the process. And now, here comes the surgery. Okay, here's the old Hyperkin board. Pretty good looking tech, but this is trash. Over here is the board and the iNext controller. Looks pretty similar, but also pretty different. It's different colored. The controller casing is definitely the lowest quality possible for this sort of product. But the board itself, I'm hoping to God, fits in the Hyperkin casing that I have ready here, because I really want to play this, and if this conversion works, then other people can do this too, without any real training in electronics, which is why I'm hoping to God this works. Oy, these boards couldn't be more different in the way they look. I just hope that they can actually transplant. I am both pleasantly and unpleasantly surprised. The board used in the Hyperkin had different parts for the shoulder buttons here, but the replacement board does fit. It lines up the screw holes at the very least, but it's just slightly undersized, and these parts are much wider on the Hyperkin. They don't properly set in here, so I'm going to have to break out the hot glue gun in order to lock everything down in here. Okay, I have more or less transplanted the new board. It looks like a hot glue mess. I'm probably going to have to do a bit more finagling to make sure that this thing fits in here. But the next time I start recording, I will have the final result, whether or not the controller works or doesn't. Okay, moment of truth. Does it work? Okay. No, it's not doing anything. Oh, okay, there we go. Alright, so far so good. Okay, Mario. Alright. Now. Starting good. Oop. Right shoulder functioning. Left shoulder functioning. Oh my god, this actually worked. I actually transplanted the guts from a generic Super Nintendo controller into a Hyperkin shell, and it works. Mind you, I'm a guy in his late 30s with no training whatsoever on working on circuitry. I don't even own a soldering iron. I did this just with a screwdriver and a hot glue gun, and it works. Okay, I don't really feel like finishing the whole race, but I did it. I actually did it. Okay, the final verdict is here. You can, indeed, swap a board from a generic Super Nintendo controller into a Hyperkin shell. Do I recommend doing this? Only if you really, really, really wanted this controller to work like I did. This one was used, it's not perfect. It's got a little divot there. And I've got another one in the controller that technically looks better on the outside than this one. And I just may do the same conversion with it later. And perhaps do the second one a little better than the first, because this is essentially a prototype. But all the buttons work. This entirely works. So, there's a hair in my mouth. So, yeah, if you're a retro gaming enthusiast who just is playing run-of-the-mill emulators on your laptop, and you happen to have an old Hyperkin controller that's not functioning, just do what I did and swap in something cheap. This iNext controller, which now is pretty much garbage, only costed me $8 used. And I intentionally got a used one because I wasn't about to take apart a new one. Where's that piece that fell? I wasn't about to take apart a new one just to do this. Okay, because generic ones are everywhere on the internet. you don't need to worry about them. But when it comes to parts, you're better off just doing this, because I guess this is the equivalent of fixing a Ferrari with parts from a Honda. Okay? Yeah, screw this. Just put it later. One thing I will note, however, is that the Hyperkin and the generic controller seem to use virtually identical screws. I did not mix them up, though. I kept them intentionally separated and only used the Hyperkin screws on the Hyperkin controller. But the bolt pattern for the screws on the generic board versus the Hyperkin board, all 5 bolts seem to match up. So, with a little finagling, you can indeed put a completely different and unrelated board into a Hyperkin controller. And now, I can look forward to finally using this. It's been a chore, but I am ecstatic with the results. It feels good. It still retains its weight, more or less. And now it's plug and play. It does not need to be programmed or remapped. It does not need to do anything to it. I just plug it in and it goes. This is awesome.